The first time Arya Silverlake saw the Alpha King, he was standing in a river of blood. The invasion of Moonhaven Pack had lasted exactly 4 hours, which spoke more to Kai Thornwood's ruthless efficiency than any mercy. Bodies littered the central square where the Pack's warriors had made their final stand, and the air tasted of copper and ash. Arya pressed herself against the stone wall of the healing house, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the massive figure move through, the carnage with predatory grace. He was taller than any alpha she had ever seen, his frame wrapped in battle-worn armor that seemed to drink in the firelight. His face was a study in brutal beauty, all sharp angles and cold eyes that held no trace of remorse. This was Kai Thornwood, the Blade King, the conqueror who had united the Northern Territories through fear and violence, and he was walking directly toward her hiding place. Arya's instincts screamed at her to run, but her healers' training kept her rooted. Inside the healing house behind her were 17 wounded civilians, mostly children and elders who couldn't fight. If she ran, she drew attention to them. If she stayed, perhaps she could negotiate mercy. Her fingers trembled as she stepped out from the shadows, forcing herself to meet those cold silver eyes. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Kai stopped mid-stride, his hand falling to the sword at his hip. Something flickered across his expression, too quick to name. And then his features hardened into that mask of brutal indifference she had seen from across the square. But Arya had caught it, that split second of something almost like surprise. She lifted her chin, forcing steel into her voice even as terror clawed at her throat. She told him there were innocents inside, people who needed medical care, people who posed no threat to his conquest. She expected him to laugh, to cut her down, to burn the building with everyone inside. Instead, Kai stared at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, his nostrils flaring as if catching a scent that confused him. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He stepped back and ordered his warriors to leave the healing house untouched. The occupation that followed was brutal and efficient. Kai installed himself in the Alpha's former residence, executed the previous leadership for their resistance, and began the systematic process of absorbing Moonhaven into his growing empire. Arya watched from the margins, continuing her work in the poorest districts where the conquest had hit hardest. She had been raised by her grandmother in these forgotten corners of the pack, learning the old healing arts that combined herbs with the subtle magic that ran through Omega bloodlines. Most wolves had forgotten that Omegas once possessed their own power, reduced them to breeding stock and social pariahs. But Arya's grandmother had taught her differently, had whispered stories of ancient times when Omegas were revered as healers and seers, before the great purge that nearly destroyed their gifts. Arya carried that legacy in her blood, though she kept it carefully hidden. In a world ruled by alphas like Kai Thornwood, any hint of unusual power was dangerous. She thought she had escaped the Blade King's notice until he appeared at her healing house 3 weeks after the conquest. He arrived without fanfare, dismissing his guards with a curt gesture that left them stationed. Outside, Arya was alone, grinding herbs for pain remedies, when his shadow fell across her workspace. Her hands stilled, every nerve suddenly alive with awareness. Kai filled the doorway, seeming even larger in the confined space, and his eyes were fixed on her with that same unsettling intensity from their first encounter. He told her he required her services, his voice a dark rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. When she asked what injury needed tending, he pulled off his glove and, extended his hand. His palm was scored with dozens of thin cuts, some fresh and bleeding, others half-healed and infected. They weren't battle wounds, she realized with growing horror. They were self-inflicted, the marks of someone who hurt themselves regularly. Before she could stop herself, she asked why. The look he gave her could have frozen fire. He said nothing, simply waited, and Arya understood this was a test. Refuse the Alpha King and face consequences, or comply and step into dangerous territory. She chose compliance, but on her own terms. Arya gestured for him to sit, then gathered her supplies with steady hands that belied her racing heart. As she cleaned the wounds, she felt it for the first time. That wrongness that radiated from him like heat from a fever. It was more than just the violence she knew he was capable of. more than the cruelty that had built his reputation. There was something fundamentally corrupt in his energy, a darkness that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. Her healing senses recoiled from it even as her hands continued their work. When her fingers brushed his palm directly, skin to skin, the world exploded into sensation. Pain lanced through her, not physical but spiritual. The echo of torment so profound it nearly drove her to her knees. But beneath the agony, she felt something else. A desperate flicker of something that might have once been good, drowning in an ocean of corruption. Kai jerked his hand back as if burned, his eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. He demanded to know what she was, what she had done to him. Arya stared at him, her own heart pounding, because in that moment of contact, she had felt her own power respond, the dormant light in her bloodline flaring to life for the first time since her grandmother's death. She told him she was just a healer, nothing more, but they both knew it was a lie. Kai left without another word, but Arya knew he would return. That night, she dreamed of darkness and light at war, of ancient battles fought before the current pack structures existed, of healers who carried dawn in their veins, and warriors who had been corrupted by forbidden magic. She woke gasping, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory with warnings she had never fully understood. The Healers of Dawn had been hunted to extinction 3 centuries ago, their power deemed too dangerous by the Alpha Council that rose to power. They could purify corruption or destroy the corrupted entirely, making them a threat to any Alpha who had used dark magic to enhance their strength. Arya's grandmother had been the last of that bloodline, hiding in poverty and obscurity to protect her granddaughter. Now that power was waking in Arya, responding to the corruption it sensed in Kai Thornwood, and she had no idea how to control it. The Alpha King did return, again and again over the following weeks. Sometimes he claimed injury, other times he simply appeared and watched her, work with that unsettling intensity. Arya began to understand that he was drawn to her the way a dying man was drawn to water, instinctively seeking something he couldn't name. Each time they touched, she felt that surge of light meeting darkness, and each time it grew stronger. She began to see glimpses of what lay beneath his brutal exterior, fragments of memory and emotion that leaked through when their energies connected. She saw a young boy screaming as dark magic was forced into his veins, alphas in ceremonial robes chanting words that twisted his very nature. She saw battles where he fought, not because he wanted to, but because the corruption inside him demanded blood. She saw moments of horrified clarity when he realized what he had become, followed by the deliberate self-harm he used to feel something other than the constant hunger for violence. Kai Thornwood was not simply a cruel conqueror. He was a victim of something far more sinister, transformed into a weapon by forces that still controlled him from the shadows. If you are captivated by stories of impossible redemption and the power of light to burn through even the deepest darkness, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below telling us if you think someone like Kai deserves a second chance, or if some souls are too far gone to save. The turning point came on the night of the harvest moon, when Kai appeared at her door covered in blood that wasn't his own. He had been in battle again, expanding his territory, and the corruption was worse than she had ever seen it. His eyes were more wolf than man, his hands shaking with barely controlled violence. He told her he was losing himself, that soon there would be nothing left but the beast the magic had created. Arya made a choice in that moment that would change everything. She placed both hands on his chest, directly over his heart, and let her power flow freely for the first time. Light erupted from her palms, searing and pure, and Kai screamed as it met the darkness inside him. The battle between corruption and purification raged in his body, and Arya held on, even as the backlash threatened to tear her apart. She saw everything, every life he had taken, every cruelty he had committed, every moment of self-hatred and despair. But she also saw the man he could have been, the leader he was meant to be before the corruption claimed him. The light in her blood recognized something worth saving, even if she herself was not sure. When it was over, they were both on the floor, gasping and trembling. Kai stared at her with wonder and terror, because for the first time in 20 years, the constant screaming hunger in his mind had gone quiet. The corruption was still there, too deeply rooted to remove in one session. But it had been pushed back, given breathing room. He could think clearly, feel something other than rage and bloodlust, and he could feel the mate bond that had been there all along, buried under layers of dark magic. Arya was his true mate, the one the moon had chosen for him, and her light was the only thing in the world strong enough to fight the darkness that had been forced into his soul. The realization broke something in him. He asked her why she had helped him, why she risked herself for a monster. Arya's answer was simple and devastating, because underneath the corruption, she could see who he really was, and that man deserved a chance to fight back. But their awakening did not go unnoticed. Kai's sudden clarity revealed truths he had been too corrupted to see before. His closest advisors, the ones who had been with him since the beginning of his conquest, were not loyal servants but puppet masters. They were members of an ancient cult that had been using him as a weapon to destabilize the werewolf kingdoms, preparing the way for something far more sinister. The dark magic that corrupted him required constant reinforcement, which explained the strange rituals they insisted he perform, the specific battles they pushed him toward. They had turned him into the Blade King deliberately, knowing that eventually he would either die in battle or transform completely into a mindless beast they could fully control. Either outcome served their purposes. Discovering this sent Kai into a rage unlike anything Arya had witnessed, but this time it was focused and righteous rather than mindless. He began to plan, using his newfound clarity to lay traps for the conspirators while pretending the corruption still controlled him fully. Arya became his anchor during this dangerous game. Every few days she would perform the purification ritual, slowly burning away layers of the dark magic while teaching him to resist its pull. It was agonizing work for both of them. Each session left her drained and left him confronting the full weight of his actions without the numbing haze of corruption. He remembered every face of every person he had killed, felt the full impact of the terror he had spread. The guilt nearly destroyed him. But Arya refused to let him surrender to despair. She told him that redemption was not about forgetting or being forgiven. It was about choosing to be better every single day, despite the weight of the past. She forced him to face the families of his victims, to see the destruction he had caused, not from a distance but up close. It was brutal and necessary, and it forged something new in Kai, something harder and purer than the corruption had ever created. Their relationship deepened in ways that went beyond the mate bond. Arya saw all of him, the worst parts and the broken pieces, and chose him anyway, not because she excused what he had done, but because she believed in who he could become. Kai, in turn, saw her strength and refused to let her diminish herself. He pushed her to embrace her power fully, to stop hiding the light that made her extraordinary. Together, they were something neither could be alone, a balance of darkness and light that created something entirely new. But love alone was not enough to heal the damage or stop the conspiracy. They needed allies, people who could help them dismantle the cult and rebuild what Kai had destroyed. That meant confronting the other Alpha leaders, the ones who had suffered under his conquest, and asking them to trust that his transformation was real. The confrontation with the Alpha Council was one of the most difficult trials they faced. Kai stood before the leaders of every pack he had conquered, and laid bare the truth of his corruption, the conspiracy that had used him, and his determination to make amends. He offered no excuses, asked for no forgiveness he had not earned. Instead, he proposed a complete restructuring of pack governance, one that would prevent any single Alpha from accumulating the kind of power he had wielded. He would dismantle his own empire, return autonomy to the conquered packs, and spend the rest of his life hunting down the cult members who had orchestrated everything. It was political suicide, the complete destruction of everything he had built. Many of the Alphas called for his execution, unwilling to believe his transformation was genuine. But others, seeing Arya at his side and sensing the fundamental change in his energy, were willing to give him a chance to prove himself through actions rather than words. the war against the cult was brutal and costly. The conspirators had been preparing for centuries, had corrupted alphas throughout the kingdoms, and commanded dark magic that made Kai's corruption look like child's play. But Kai fought with a clarity and purpose he had never possessed before, and Arya's light became a weapon that could destroy the corruption at its source. They hunted down cult strongholds, freed other alphas who had been similarly corrupted, and slowly unraveled the network that had been manipulating werewolf politics for generations. Each battle took a toll. Arya's power was not infinite, and using it to purify others while maintaining Kai's stability pushed her to her limits. There were moments when Kai begged her to stop, to let him carry the corruption rather than watch her burn herself out saving others. But Arya was not just saving Kai anymore. She had found her purpose, the reason her bloodline had survived when all others had been destroyed. She was meant to be the light that burned away the darkness threatening to consume their entire world. The final confrontation came in the ancient temple where the cult had first created their corruption magic. The high priestess who led them was a creature of nightmares, her body more shadow than flesh. After centuries of dark ritual, she revealed the full scope of their plan, to corrupt every alpha in every kingdom, until werewolves were nothing but mindless beasts that could be controlled by the cult's magic. Kai had been their greatest success, a prototype for what they intended to do on a massive scale. The priestess offered Arya a choice: surrender and watch as the cult completed their work, or try to stop them and watch Kai die as they triggered the corruption still dormant in his system. It was the ultimate test of everything they had built together. Arya looked at Kai and saw not fear, but absolute trust. He told her to do whatever was necessary, even if it meant destroying him to stop the cult. That trust, that willingness to sacrifice himself for the greater good, was the final proof that the man beneath the corruption was worth every risk she had taken. Arya made her choice. She reached into herself and found the deepest well of her power, the ancient light that had been passed down through generations of healers of dawn. Then she did something that had never been done before. Instead of using it to purify or destroy, she used it to illuminate. Light exploded from her in waves, revealing every trace of corruption in every person in the temple. The cult members shrieked as their dark magic was exposed, unable to hide behind their mortal shells. But more importantly, the light revealed the threads of corruption still woven through Kai's system, a final trap waiting to be triggered. With precision born of desperate love, Arya burned away each thread one by one, working faster than the priestess could activate them. It should have killed her, the sheer power expenditure far beyond what any healer could survive. But Kai, understanding what she was attempting, used the mate bond to channel his own life force into her, giving her the strength to finish the purification. Together, they became a conduit for something greater than either could achieve alone, and the light that resulted burned away not just Kai's corruption, but shattered the source of the cult's power entirely. The explosion of purified energy destroyed the temple and every cult member inside it. When the dust settled, Kai and Arya lay in the rubble, barely alive, but finally, truly free. The corruption was gone, burned away completely, leaving Kai as he should have been from the beginning. The transformation was not just magical, but physical. The harsh lines of cruelty that had defined his features softened, and the cold silver of his eyes warmed to something almost gentle. He was still powerful, still an alpha to his core, but the wrongness that had made him the Blade King was gone. Arya had saved him, but the cost was evident in her trembling hands and the new threads of silver in her dark hair. Using that much power had aged her, marked her in ways that might never fully heal. But when Kai asked if she regretted it, her answer was immediate and fierce. She would do it again in a heartbeat, because he was worth saving, and their world was worth fighting for. The aftermath was complex and painful. Kai spent years making amends, traveling to every pack he had conquered and working to rebuild what he had destroyed. He kept his promise to dismantle his empire, returning power to local alphas and establishing councils rather than dictatorships. Many never forgave him, and he accepted that as the price of his actions. But others, seeing his sustained efforts and genuine change, slowly began to trust that the Blade King was truly dead. and something better had taken his place. Arya worked alongside him, using her healing gifts to help those traumatized by the wars and training, other Omegas in the old arts that had been lost. Together, they became symbols of transformation, proof that even the darkest souls could find their way back to the light with the right catalyst. Their love story was not a fairy tale of instant healing and perfect happiness. It was messy and hard, full of setbacks and moments when the weight of the past threatened to crush them both. There were nights when Kai woke screaming from nightmares of his victims, and days when Arya's power flickered and failed under the strain of what she had done. But they chose each other every single day, through the darkness and the doubt, building something real and lasting from the ashes of who they had been. The mate bond that had been buried under corruption bloomed fully, but it was their choice to honor it, to work for it, that made it meaningful. They were not perfect, but they were partners in the truest sense, balancing each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths. 5 years. After the fall of the cult, Arya stood in the rebuilt Moonhaven Pack, now a thriving community that served as a model for the new governance structure. Kai was beside her, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly where their first child grew. They had thought children might be impossible after everything their bodies had endured, but life had a way of surprising them. The baby was strong, already showing signs of inheriting both Arya's light and Kai's alpha strength. Around them, the pack celebrated the Harvest Moon Festival, a tradition that had been dark and violent under the old regime, but was now a celebration of community and gratitude. Former enemies stood together, sharing food and stories, and children who had never known the terror of the Blade King played without fear. It was not perfect. There were still those who harbored resentment, still challenges to overcome. But it was proof that change was possible, that redemption could be earned through sustained effort and genuine transformation. As the moon rose full and bright, Kai pulled Arya close and whispered his gratitude for the day she had chosen to see him as more than a monster. Arya smiled and reminded him that she had not saved him. They had saved each other. Her light had burned away his darkness, but his darkness had given her light purpose and strength she never knew she possessed. They were two halves of a whole, perfectly balanced, and together they had changed their world. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and hope, a testament to the truth that no blade could cut, no darkness could extinguish the light of love that refused to surrender. The Blade King was dead, but Kai Thornwood had been reborn, and with Arya by his side, he would spend every day of his life proving that redemption was not just possible, but worth every painful step of the journey. Before we close this chapter, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in second chances? For those who have committed terrible acts, or are some deeds unforgivable, what did you think of Arya's choice to risk everything for Kai's redemption? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales of supernatural romance, where love truly conquers the darkest of challenges. Share this video with anyone who believes in the transformative power of love and the possibility that even the most broken souls can find their way back to the light. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we will see you in the next story where magic, passion, and destiny intertwine in ways you never expected.